I'm very pleased to introduce to you Marney Fritts, the soon-to-be Dr. Marney Fritts, of course. Marney did her BA and BS. She did a BA in religion and a BS in biology at Pacific Lutheran University. She holds an MA in theology from Luther, and she is working on her doctorate of theology, right, at Luther. Is it a Ph.D. or a doctorate of theology? PhD now. Yeah, Ph.D., yeah. At Luther, where her advisor is Steve Paulson. And she's working on the Doctrine of the Atonement. So she is what you call ABD. So you could call her, that's all but dissertation, right? So ABD Fritts. Anyway, I've known Marney for many years, and I've always enjoyed her theological insights, and I think you will too. So without any further explication of what we're doing here, here is Marney Fritts.
Well, first of all, let me begin with Mark, who has waited far too long to absolve you. And more importantly, may the Lord be with you and your family as you go through these health issues, that He grant them healing and, of course, the assurance of His salvation. Okay, now on to these matters. This little paper, just a point of observation. Now you've had some wonderful historical lectures, discussions from two very brilliant historians, and also the reflection from Mary Anderson. This is going to be a bit different in tone and presentation because I'm a theologian. So it will be quite different. Even if I had his paper 2 weeks before, it would still be different. So, in the year 1532, Luther experienced the worst health issues of his life. His feverish schedule of preaching multiple times a day, writing at a rate of 10 pages a day in the course of his career, not to mention his fruitful duties in his vocations of husband and father, had trickled down to virtually nothing but eating, drinking, and sleeping. Yet even while his own health was failing, he identified a greater plague, and the factious spirits such as Junker Hans, who Luther named among those who had started attacking what we confess as the third article of the Creed, specifically the resurrection of the dead and the life everlasting. So, in August of that year, the good Lord blessed him with the energy and the word to muster 17 sermons in 1 Corinthians 15, in which the Apostle Paul had once defended this early Christian belief. Luther identifies the advantages of having complicit fodder found in bound wills that these factious spirits preached into. He illustrates, and as it is, the factious spirits enjoy two great advantages with the rabble. The one is curiosity, the other satiety. Those are two large gates through which the devil can pass with a wagon of hay, indeed with all of hell, promoting them to say, "Oh, this man can preach nothing but baptism, the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and the Creed, with which even the children are conversant. What's the idea that he constantly harangues us with the same message? Who is not able to do that? After all, one must not always stick to the same thing, but develop and progress, etc. That signifies satiety and weariness of the message. Junker Curiosity joins himself to this and says, "Oh, we must also hear this fellow. He is a fine, learned, and pious man," etc. Thus they lend a hand and humor this curiosity to hear what their ears itch to hear, saying, "Dear people, all this while you have been hearing the same thing. You must progress beyond that and hear and examine not only one, but also others. And thus, a person follows these people, lets himself be coaxed and wielded, and stands there gaping and staring, and gives ear to all that is told him. Now, the ELCA. The ELCA had inherited the best theology in the world. The doctrine of justification by faith alone, apart from works of the law, the teaching of the bondage of the will, the theology of the cross, the distinction of law and gospel, the relationship between the preached word and faith, the two kingdoms distinction, the conscience, as Luther defined it, the doctrine of original sin and the forgiveness of sin, simul justus et peccator, and scriptura sacra sui ipsius interpres. Holy Scripture interprets itself. The ELCA had inherited the best theology in the world, but it had itching ears and has now jettisoned the whole thing and replaced it with the doctrine of self-expression and justification, the free will, the theology of glory, the reward of the gospel through my own personal interpretation and application of the law to me, the relationship of preaching to I am the master of my fate and the captain of my soul, the one kingdom teaching of my best life now, the conscience as my own best internal voice to myself, no doctrine of original sin and the forgiveness of sin, rather, God accepts me just as I am. No simul, just justus in myself. And Holy Scripture interprets itself only until I misuse the once good tool of historical criticism to remove the law and its accusation. Jesus Christ becomes remoto Christo. The ELCA had inherited the best theology, but it was attached to a bunch of sinners so therefore it was traipsed in with the sins of liberal Protestantism and the Enlightenment. Luther had long before identified the problem of these ages to come in his study of Paul's letter to the Galatians. He called this horrible monster the presumption of righteousness. This presumption of righteousness is simply to trust in one's own rightness or righteousness. Being satiated and weary with the same message of forgiveness, the sinner hopes for righteousness in who she is and what she does. Since I am not a murderer, thief, adulterer, robber, I am therefore righteous. Once the sinner looks upon her own civil righteousness with pride and trust, there has been a transgression. The sinner's trust has overreached its eschatological limit and looks for security in such a way that she attaches eternity to it. She attaches her identity, her very purpose for being, and who she is and does.